So we're going to talk a little bit about health and safety when it comes to conducting preliminary root assessment surveys, and kind of like discuss equipment as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of like asbestos and fiberglass, which are like two big health risks, using telescopic ladders, generally go through a little bit of other equipment that might be useful, and kind of be efficient and professional and managing risks, and then kind of like talk a little bit about how you need to do a risk assessment when you're on site. So anyway, this is a picture of my friend Xenia. So this is what you should look like when you're fully equipped in a loft space. So you can see she's got a head torch on, a nice asbestos mask, gloves, overalls, and a torch, hand torch, held torch as well. I mean, something that you can do is to participate in an asbestos awareness course. I mean, if you're going to work with bats, asbestos is a much bigger risk compared to, for example, rabies. To be able to work with bats, you need to have a rabies injection to be vaccinated against rabies. And I would say the other thing you should do is educate yourself when it comes to asbestos. And yeah, both topics, by the way. Obviously, very useful to know a lot about bat rabies as well, especially if the clients are asking you. So what you need to know about asbestos is that for some types of asbestos, it is enough to just inhale one particle of it to get an inoperable cancer tumor. So this is what I've learned when I've done asbestos course with Natural England in my role as a volunteer bat roost visitor. Asbestos stays in your lungs forever. It just never comes out again once it's been inhaled, and it vibrates in the lining, and that then causes scarring or formation of tumors, depending on what type of asbestos or what type of reaction you're having. And symptoms may not start until after 30 years. So it's a long-term problem that's gonna kind of like potentially stop you from seeing your grandchildren. So if you get a mesothelioma, that is a malignant tumor in the lung lining, that's not very good. The peak of this mesothelioma epidemic is expected to be 2015 to 2020, so about now. And death rates are likely to be about 2,000 people per year at the moment. And this is because of delay reaction to kind of health and safety regarding asbestos, because people were just not as aware of it 30 years ago. There may be a future peak when it comes to bat surveyors that, you know, we haven't estimated yet. So this is something we're trying to prevent. Sundström, I just like it because it's a Swedish brand, and I'm Swedish myself, and I kind of trust their products. So that's kind of the reason I've picked that one. But it is also a well-known brand. So I have met with asbestos removal staff on building sites, and they are also using the same one. So it's not just my personal preference, it is a accepted good product that is used in this country. Right, so the general kind of thing you need to know is no one knows what happened in that loft space that you're surveying over the last 50 years. There is, like, this building could have swapped hands on several occasions. There have been several new owners. No one knows what kind of cowboy builder that has been in there removing asbestos in a non-professional way. And all that's left is a little bit of dust. And that is the danger. So you might walk in there and you look around and you go, oh, there's no asbestos here. But that little grey dust on the floor, like, where did that come from? What happened 30 years ago in that corner of the loft space? Like, there's just no way for you of knowing that. And there's no little air test that you can quickly do to determine whether there's any asbestos in there. And also, as a bat worker, we tend to kind of perhaps root around a little bit more looking for droppings. So we're then increasing the risk compared to, for example, well, maybe a plumber or electrician, although they might be rooting around a little bit on the floor as well. but any kind of rooting around would definitely then increase the risk of getting like really old dust that's trapped somewhere to become airborne. Compared to a paper mask, I mean, a lot of ecological consultancies use the paper mask instead of the Sundström masks. And the reason they do that is that you have to have the Sundström mask professionally face fitted. And that tends to be a little bit of a barrier for some ecological consultants. They feel a bit complicated perhaps. And then they provide a paper mask instead. And that's just ridiculous, because you're then providing a lower quality protection because you're not 100% sure that the higher quality protection will actually fit and work. But it's my experience that, you know, you obviously got to hold the mask and make sure that it's really well sealed around the face, and that you're not smelling anything. If you can smell things, it's probably not right. And the little filter that you have in there needs to be replaced at least once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on how often you use the mask. And there's also little paper filters in there that you should replace on a regular basis. And ideally you should do that outside, or, you know, have a bin bag ready to seal it in there. So you've got to know how to kind of like maintain the mask as well and look after it. So if you compare the risk of asbestos compared to the yellow fiberglass loft insulation, that is also a health risk. Inhaling it can reduce lung function. It can cause eye, throat, and skin irritation. But the reason fiberglass isn't considered to be as dangerous as asbestos is because it stays in the lungs for 10 years. So it doesn't stay in the lung permanently. It does actually eventually move out, but kind of staying in the ears for staying in the lungs for 10 years is bad enough. And if you're in loft spaces on a regular basis and inhale that on a regular basis, that's obviously going to build up. So that could be a accumulating problem for someone who surveys loft spaces. So everyone who works with bats, they have been trained to lift the insulation material to look for old bat droppings in between the layers. So obviously you're going to be in there rooting around in the material a little bit, and that's going to then increase the likelihood that you inhale it. So that's why you need to have a mask on every time you go inside of a loft space. And then again, there could be additional asbestos old dust in between those old layers of fiberglass. So you might get a double whammy of both types of dangerous dust. So other risks when it comes to being inside the loft space, you know, in the summer, the loft space does heat up a lot. It can easily be 30 to 40 degrees inside a loft space. So before you're planning to go in there and do a bat survey, you need to check the weather forecast during the summer months, because you might be in for a shock, and you should definitely not go into a loft space during warm temperatures if you're on your own, because you may end up fainting inside of there, and then you have no one to drag you out or notice that you're in there. So the other thing you should do is, you should always plan to do it kind of morning or late afternoon if you do a bat survey of loft space, if it's during the summer months, or warm weather in general. And just bring water and as well, make sure that you have a drink before you go into loft space, after you go into you leave the loft space, because it can be really dehydrating. I've had heat stroke myself once. I went into loft at 12 o'clock, and then I came out, and then I had like a can of drink before and a can after that the client gave me. And I then sat in the car and got stuck on the motorway. Thank you. And had no aircon in my car because it was broken. And I got heat stroke after that. And I felt like just dehydrated and kind of tired and kind of stupid for about a week or two afterwards. It's just absolutely draining feeling. So it took a while to recover. The other thing you should think about is you might have wasps in there. It's very common, and sometimes you come into the loft space and you find like really massive active water. Now, if you do find that, it might be a wise thing to just back out of the loft, because it might be too dangerous to be in there. But that's obviously up to you to decide how risky it is. But just as a general thing, just like move very slowly when you're in there. I would say that I go up and I tend to sit down when I get into loft space and just kind of like gather my thoughts and meditate a little bit and just like think about the risks and look around with a torch, so I don't make any hasty decisions. So I kind of calm myself down and get into like a bit of a meditative state before I start walking around inside of the loft. So obviously, if you make quick movements, you might knock over a wasp nest. I have been stung a couple of times, and once I got stung, I was in the loft, I didn't wear overalls. I think that made a difference. I think if I would have had overalls, I would have been a little bit better protected. But I kind of sat down, and you know, that kind of bit where your t-shirt meets your jeans at the back, I basically got stung in the arse because I sat down on the wasps. So I wouldn't recommend that. Rusty nails are quite common as well. So that's another reason we should do really slow movements. So you don't kind of, might be something sticking out just next to your head or your face, which wouldn't be very nice. Electric cables, there's going to be a lot of those up there, kind of for like down lights and different equipment that they tend to pull their electric cables around. So I would say look around really carefully with a torch and just never touch or step on anything that looks like electric cables for equipment. And then you might have really old timber beams that you're walking on, especially if you've got like a listed building. You have no idea if they're going to hold you or not. So what you need to do when you walk around in the loft space, you know, you need to stay walking on the rafters. And you kind of need to learn how to feel for them through insulation with the tip of your foot, like your toes. And what you try to do is you try to spread your weight by always having 3 points of contact. So obviously you've got 2 feet and then you have like 1 hand as well. And that way you try and it's a technique of kind of learning how to spread your weight. You're always holding or touching or standing on several different points, if that makes sense. Something I would recommend is doing yoga, meditation. It's important to learn how to stay flexible and learn how to not panic if you end up in a narrow space. So I think that can be helpful.
When you go into a loft void, you'll notice the joists which run along the floor usually run in the same ways as the vertical timber here, which are called the rafters. So when you go up, you're going to want to try to maintain either 3 or 4 points of contact throughout, and also wearing gloves just so that, you know, loft voids can be quite dirty. And you can also get splinters if the timbers are like roughly sawn. So it's just best to wear gloves whenever you go up. So typically in a lot of loft voids, you'll notice that insulation is present. And a lot of it can be quite dense and thick and cover the entire void. So what you're going to want to do is, if you can't see the joists, clear as much of the insulation as you can with your foot, just to make sure that you are only standing on the joists. And not on the either the plasterboard or, you know, anything that makes up the floor of the void, as you can go straight through it. Another point to make aware of is be aware of where, and then of course when you're going in and surveying the loft, you're going to want to try and do this systematically, so that all the spaces are searched. But this comes with a caveat with only if it's safe to do so. So if you see any timbers which are like rotted, or just don't look safe to walk on, just survey it from where you can do. Don't put your, you know, your life at risk.
Ladders now then. There are ones that come in 3 parts that you kind of like screw together. And then you have the telescopic ones, and then you have the ones that kind of a little bit like a upside down V-shaped. I prefer the telescopic ones myself. I think they're easier to carry and they're easier to fit if you've got like a small locked hatch. but you need to know how to use them correctly. So the way it works, basically you pull the ladder, the first bit on the top first, and then you pull up one rung at a time, and then you get a green panel showing when you pull them up properly, and it's still red if you haven't done it properly. And then when you unfold the ladder again, you do it backwards. So you try to always do it the same order. The risk with using a telescopic ladder is obviously if you don't use them properly, they could collapse. They also have a tendency to squash your fingers, and I don't know if you can see me, but like this bit tends to quite easily get squashed. So you've got to be really careful when you handle them because they're quite heavy. A good thing about them being a little bit heavy is that they tend to be quite well balanced. They kind of don't tip over so easily. So if you pull them up so they're kind of stuck in the loft hatch, then they can't fall sideways. And then they're quite well balanced. So there's quite a low risk of them kind of tipping over. So my advice is if you have a telescopic ladder and it ever fails on you in any way and it's not your fault, just never use that ladder again. Because if it's showed that there is a problem with it, that's a really huge risk and you take that risk. So the advice is once a kind of telescopic ladder fails, it should be thrown away. Like that you can't really repair them or anything like that, as far as I know, because they're just a risk after that. What else? They need a bit of maintenance as well. So you've got to make sure that you kind of check that everything's working at least once a year. And you need to spray a little bit of silicone spray on them once a year as well, just to keep as a maintenance thing. So they do require a little bit of looking after. I've had the telescopic ladder I've had it for 12 and it's never failed me. So I'm fairly happy with it. But I've had another ladder that has failed me, or two. So they do sometimes. I would recommend spending a bit of money on a telescopic ladder rather than buying a cheap one, because you're probably going to pay the price for a cheap low quality ladder. So this one, for example, is about £150. So I think you should spend at least that much if you're buying a ladder, probably a bit more. If it's something like 80 quid, it might not be very good quality. This ladder here reaches 3.8 meters. So I think about 4 meters is kind of like as far as high like I would like to climb. That's obviously up to you, depending on what kind of job you're doing. But for most kind of the purposes of climbing into loft space or looking a little bit on the outside of the building, I think 4 meters is plenty. When it comes to trees, you might need a bigger ladder. Torches, I think at Acer we use the LED lenser torches. Okay, so the good thing about the LED lenser is that just use normal batteries. So I would recommend if you go doing a bat survey and you forgot your torch at home, that's not good. You obviously need a really good torch to do a bat survey. You can't climb into loft space with a little head torch and say, oh, I've used a head torch to survey the loft. That's just not professional. It's a bit like, you know, if you're lamping for great crested newts, you need to have a certainly good enough torch to do that. Same thing goes with bat surveys. You need a good quality torch. And then you bring a head torch. That's just in case you drop your torch or in case your battery runs out. So the head torch is for orientation as a backup. It's not for actually conducting the survey. Something else you might want to have, you don't have to have that, but I've been using a laser point distance meter, and that just helps you to kind of determine the dimensions of the loft space. You can sometimes just see that on drawings, like the architect drawings, or just estimate it anyway. It's just a little tool that you may find useful. What you definitely need to have is overalls, so some kind of like boiler suit, or you can also get like disposable overalls that are actually made of Tyvek, which is the breathable roofing membrane that bat workers don't like much because it's not very bat friendly. You can buy those Tyvek overalls that are, you can buy like 100, pack of 100. So that can be useful because they're like disposable ones. Personally, I like that the boiler suit is quite thick fabric, as I was telling you, with like wasps and stuff. It's quite good to have that thick fabric. I recommend that you wear jeans or like a thicker material trousers as well with it. Knee pads. I use some kind of like crawling garden knee pads when I go into loft spaces that are kind of put on with Velcro. I didn't used to. I used to just crawl around on my knees, and they started hurting after a couple of years. I used to do a lot of bat surveys, so I would recommend that you just start wearing these pads before your knees hurt. That'd be a good plan. Gloves, like you always need to have gloves as well when you're in the loft space. It helps you kind of hold on to the ladder in a safe way, helps you to protect yourself when you're in the loft. But like wear a couple of like thin gloves, like the type you would use for bat handling. And then once you've done the survey, what you should do is everything you've had inside the loft space should be washed. So if you were wearing overalls, those should go in the washing machine. You should wear a pair of shoes that you can easily put in the washing machine as well. And gloves and knee pads and everything should just be washed afterwards, because otherwise you might bring home asbestos dust. And the other thing I would say is that you should wash yourself, your hair afterwards, because if you're then in the evening lying down next to a loved one and they're like sniffing your hair, they might be inhaling asbestos. So that used to be a problem with children of people who worked in asbestos mines. They'd come home and say hi to daddy when he got home from work, and then they got dust from his dusty clothes and got asbestos problems themselves later on in life. So, and that's another reason why, if you're with a client and they want to follow you up to the loft hatch and stand around there, and they want their children to climb up the loft hatch and look for bats, that might not be a good idea, because there's asbestos up there potentially. There's definitely fiberglass up there and a lot of other dust. So it might be better to kind of have a talk with the client, a coffee with, and then once you go up to the loft space, you kind of tell the client that you want to do that on your own, in your own time, and that they have to wait downstairs. And it's difficult because it's their house and they obviously want to take charge. But you then just explain that for health and safety, it might not be suitable for them to get up there with all the dust. You need a good camera. So personally, I use a super old camera, but a friend of mine recommended it for doing bat surveys, and it's done me really well over the years. It tends to, when I first bought it, it was like 350 quid. But now I just buy used ones on eBay secondhand. So I buy like 2 or 3 every year, because when you're in the loft space, there's a lot of dust. You probably, and if you also go to building sites like I do, you probably end up breaking a couple of cameras, or they'll like just really clog up with the dust. So it's probably not a good idea to bring your best camera that you really like. It's better to kind of have something that's kind of wear and tear. So that's why I buy used ones that are good quality. Anyway, the professional way to always, when you go out and do bat surveys and stuff, you always bring spare batteries, you always bring spare memory cards. Make sure that you have that in your kit. Dropping pots. So you can buy, if you look at the little ones with white lids, those are my personal favorites. You can buy them from NHBS in bags of like 30 or 60 of them. And I find that that's enough for me for a bat season. I mean, I don't do as many surveys now myself, but I used to do maybe 50 surveys a year, and maybe I find bat droppings in 20 to 30 of those. So if you buy a pack of 30, that should take you through a year. The good thing about the pots is that you can see through them, so you can see what's kind of in there, but you can also write on the lid. It's a very important part of taking a sample, is making sure that you don't mix it up with other samples or lose it. So you can then kind of put what loft space was it found, what property, what date was it found, all that kind of information can be used, written with a marker pen at the top of the lid. And also because the droppings are then in a container rather than a little plastic bag, they won't crumble, so they'll stay intact, which is something when they do the DNA testing, they take out one dropping, so they don't just crush them all together. So that's just from their practical point of view as well, that the droppings are intact. Endoscopes. I don't think we're actually going to talk about bat detectors, but I'm just going to mention the bringing like a little handheld heterodyne detector. And what you use that for when you do a PRA is you can listen for bat calls inside of the loft space, especially if it's in the middle of the summer, and especially if you have a big maternity colony. You might actually hear the bats just normal hearing, but then if you do hear something, then you can take out your little bat detector and listen and see if maybe you actually hear a whole bat colony in there. The other thing is endoscopes. We use the rigid CA300 sea snake endoscope. It's a really good one. It's about 350 quid, and it's got a video function and a little SD memory card, so you can take photographs and video what you're doing. But that's a special level of your bat license. So just like handling endoscopes does need a special training session, and also hand netting, which is not something we do a lot of anyway. If you're going out on the site and you already have drawings, it might be a good idea to bring the drawings and discuss them with the client. So you can either have that printed, or if you have access to an iPad, those are like the two things you could do. You could either just print it, or you can bring it on a tablet. You most certainly would have a form and some kind of paperwork, but doing it in your head is definitely an absolute minimum. I have a friend who, I'm not going to say what company she works for, but she has to make a risk assessment every time she goes on a lunch break, and she has to anticipate the various ways she might die during her lunch break and fill in a form about that. And she finds she's a gothic, so she finds it, even she finds that morbid. But so we don't actually do that. But once you kind of arrive on a site, I mean, many properties that we survey are inhabited by people. Some of them are kind of barns and outbuildings, and some of them are empty properties that might have been empty for a while, and there might be some damage to the property that increases the risks. But you should kind of like look around. So as you're doing the survey, you can then do the risk assessment kind of for yourself during the survey, and then also kind of do a little bit of a risk assessment, thinking about surveyors in the future. If we're going to recommend further surveys there, you're going to then give recommendations for where the surveyors are going to stand, for example, and then it might be good to consider health and safety a bit. So, for example, you probably shouldn't stand in the middle of a busy road, and then you have to find like an angle where you can stand and still see the roof areas. I mean, the classic thing that you look for when you do a risk assessment is just trips and falls. So just consider places where you might fall. Manholes. I mean, there could be hidden gaps in the garden that you're not seeing because they're like slightly covered with vegetation. So if you're walking around just staring at the roof areas, you might walk into something. Animals in general tend to be a big thing that you kind of mention in a risk assessment as well. It could be farm animals, it could be dogs running around, it could be wasp nests, and you could have like invasive vegetation like nettles or brambles or blackthorns. If you have water bodies, you might fall in them if there's like a little pond or something, or river bit next to the garden. Working in height is quite a big one as well. So just make sure that you know how to use the ladder, what angle you put the ladder up, for example, is something that you need to have training in.
So obviously all the bat surveys that I've done, dusk emergence, dawn re-entry surveys, I've been on ground level. Do you ever do surveys where you're not on ground level, if you're up by the building or anything similar to that, ever on the roof or anything like that?
You mean if you climb up? Yeah, sometimes.
Really?
I've sometimes positioned. If you look at that building on the top photograph of the slide, there was a flat roof at the back of that one, and my friend James stood there. So, and we had to, this is like an old Victorian school that was being demolished and was very vandalized and kind of partially demolished already. So yeah, we had to walk him up there at night, worrying a little bit perhaps about homeless people hiding inside the building at night. Lots of broken glass and other sharp things that you walk around in the dark then, and then you're putting it up there on the roof in the middle of the night. So a little bit scary and daring, but he got a much better view of the roof and did find a bat roosting up there. So it was well worth it for that scenario. But yeah, you've got to make a judgment then. Is it worth the risk getting up there? How many risks are there really? Yeah, asbestos obviously. So if you know what asbestos look like, but just be aware you might not see it, might still be there. And just kind of the structural safety of the building. So it might, things might collapse as you walk around. So those are like the most commonly things to look out for. And you need to make your own risk assessments once you're there. Normally we have a lead surveyor that's in charge of the whole survey and the site. So the lead surveyor should arrive a little bit earlier than the others and should then walk around the site and look for risks. Because even if you've been there previously, things could have happened. They could have dug a new hole that you haven't noticed, or lots of like sharp objects that have been left stored in the open or things like that. And that's another reason why we tend to, when we do the dusk surveys, is that we arrive fairly early. So the guidelines say you only have to arrive 15 minutes before sunset. And at that time it's getting a little bit dark already. So we tend to start the surveys half an hour before sunset. And one of the reasons for that is health and safety. Because if you arrive earlier, you got a much better chance of picking up any risks.
Remember when we did that, like, kind of psychiatric unit or something? We had to have somebody, like a security guy. Was that somebody you organised with, or they just kind of did that?
Yeah, so I would say when we did this was an active mental hospital. So I would say that's probably the riskiest site I have ever worked on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah, so you were at that one.
Yeah.
Because we could potentially have mental health patients walking around there in the dark when we're doing the bat survey. They're supposed to be locked up at that time, but there is no guarantee for it. It's not like a completely locked unit, I think. So they have some freedom to wander around and can escape and so on. And we obviously don't know why they are there in the first place.
So did you do a risk assessment for that, or did you just kind of?
I spoke to the staff and we agreed that we didn't feel that it was suitable for us to walk around there on our own in the dark, that we wanted a security team with us on the site. So we had 2 members of staff on site, and they had radio contact with each other.
Yeah.
And then we set up a WhatsApp group so that we can constantly check in with each other. And then we had marked on a map all the different surveyor positions, so that 2 people patrolling then walked between the surveyors and just checked that they were still all right. And they did little rounds.
Yeah.
So that was definitely justified for that site. But yeah, that's why I like to put up a WhatsApp group as well at the start of the survey. because then you can like quickly tell someone, oh, there's a guy loitering around near me. I don't really know what he wants. Maybe he wants to talk about bats, maybe something not so nice. And then at least you know that that person is, you know, there's someone around there, and you can go and check on them every now and then if you don't hear from them. Going back to batteries, I use a lot of chargeable batteries myself. So Energizer is a good brand that I use. Torches and stuff. These I buy, which are like ProCell is like an industrial version of Duracell. So you can buy those online. So it's like really good quality batteries. The thing with professional bat surveys is you should, if you're using a bat detector, you should always put in a fresh set of batteries. Now, this might not be the most environmentally friendly attitude to have, but it is the professional attitude to have. You can't run out of batteries in the middle of the survey. So then by using rechargeable batteries, at least you're kind of like doing something. But yeah, the idea isn't that you should need to swap your batteries halfway through a survey and then potentially miss important survey results. So batteries are quite an important part of our work. And again, you should always bring a set of spare batteries wherever you go out and do anything professional. That would be the right routine to get into. I use those little plastic containers. Do you see them at the bottom? So they're like little storage containers for batteries. So that's a really useful thing to have as well. Note keeping. So I do most of my note keeping in the form of photographs. So when I'm on site, we talked about this earlier when we do photographs of PRA surveys. I take about 200 photographs during a PRA survey. So I don't keep a lot of notes because everything I want to remember has already been photographed. Does that make sense? But if you do keep paper forms, I mean, another option is to keep your notes on your phone. There's always like a little notepad. So before I worked for Racer Ecology, I used to run my own consultancy, and I had a paper-free consultancy for 9 years, which means that in 9 years I never used paper. I never had any paper forms, nothing. It was all kept on my phone or on my laptop. So compared to kind of the traditional office keeping, that's a way you can do it. Buddy system. So when it comes to lone working, it's good to make sure that someone knows where you are and you have someone you need to check in with. I think we should talk a little bit about rabies. How do you get rabies? How does it transfer?
Through spit, isn't it?
Yeah, saliva.
Saliva, yeah, that's sorry, yeah, saliva.
Mm-hmm.
Through, yeah, I guess broken skin.
Yeah.
Would be my guess.
Do you think it has to draw blood?
It's a good question. I would say no.
Mm-hmm. Why?
Well,
You're right.
I saw a video the other day of an IV and going into the skin.
Yeah.
And I saw it doesn't actually go into the vein; it just goes into like this top layer, like the top layer of the skin.
Yeah.
And so that made me think that you probably don't need to draw blood to get into the bloodstream. So that would be my guess. Yeah.
So you got kind of what you just described is you have capillaries with like lymph fluid, and because rabies is a virus that goes into the nervous system, that's where it needs to get into. So it's not actually the blood vessels. That's an important thing here. It's the lymph fluid or the capillaries, which are kind of like smaller fluid systems that are not blood. So rabies transfers via shallow bite. So it doesn't have to be that deep. It doesn't have to bleed. Obviously, if it bleeds, then you definitely pierced everything. Well, first of all, there was a man who died from a bat bite in the UK year 2002. His name was David McRae, and he was Scottish, and he had a bat hospital. he was also a very good artist. I think he did really nice black and like pencil drawings of bats and otters, and he's quite well traveled. But they have determined from the type of rabies he died from that it was from a British bat. And that's because we have different strains of the rabies in Europe compared to other countries. So we've got 2 strains in Europe, which is just called the European Bathlyssa virus type 1 and type 2. So he died from one which is called type 2, which is the one we have mainly in the UK. And then in Europe, they sometimes have type 1 or sometimes type 2. In US and Canada and Australia, they have different viruses. So they don't have the European viruses. The American one is what we call the classic or sylvatic rabies. And that can then be present in bats or other mammals. What kind of animals can get rabies? Can birds get it?
No.
No? Why not? Or what kind of can get it then?
Like mammal things like.
Yes, that is what I'm fishing for. Sorry, I'll stop you before you say something. Sorry, go on. What were you saying?
I'm sure dogs can get it, can they?
Yeah. So dogs normally get the sylvatic or classic rabies. So the Bathlyssa virus obviously affects bats mainly. But yeah, you have to be a mammal to get rabies. It doesn't affect other groups of animals. What they found out is that any mammal can get rabies in a lab situation, but in the wild they don't always get it. So some mammals just don't get it ever, but potentially they could get it. So you never know. Like some point that could change. But at the moment, for example, horses don't get rabies. And I think that's a very good thing, because can you imagine a horse with rabies? That would be bad. What they kind of say with kind of getting post-exposure treatment. So if you have been bitten, the recommendation is that you have an injection within 72 hours.
Oh.
So that's the professional recommendation. However, there's lots of cases where people have like waited 2 weeks and then had their injections and been all right. So you shouldn't just kind of give up just because it's been more than 72 hours. So normally it is slower process to get it. The longest known period is 18 years. So someone got bitten 18 years ago and then died from rabies. So it can be weirdly slow as well to develop.
But why did that guy? Oh, sorry. Were you going to say something?
No, go on.
Why did that guy die from it then? Surely he would have known about this.
Yeah. So what kind of happened? This was 2002. So kind of the 10 years before 2002, we had a couple of bats testing positive for rabies in the UK. Most of them were found along the south coast. So therefore, we made the assumption that those were bats that had come in with storms from mainland Europe. And we thought, oh, okay, so it's probably just down in the south then. And then we found a couple of bats in kind of north of England, which was more like Lancashire area. And then we went, oh, why is that then? And by the time he got bitten, they'd never found a bat before with rabies in Scotland. So he was aware of the risk, and he was offered post-exposure treatment and said no thanks. So, and he made that decision based on the risk being so small, and it never had been anything in Scotland before. And then what happened was he started developing symptoms, and this was well known. So we knew about this before he died, that there was a person that might have rabies. But what happens is you can't test for rabies with 100% certainty without testing a part of the brain that you have to be dead for testing. So they could do a test which is called a hair sac test, which they did on him, but it's not that reliable, and he tested negative from the hair sac test. But even if he would have been tested positive at that point, there's no cure. So once he had rabies, it was too late to have post-exposure treatment, and they couldn't do much for him anyway. And he then ended up getting more ill and died because there is no cure. Okay. There is one person in history who has survived from rabies, like documented medical history, and that was a little bit later. I can't remember what year it was. It might have been like 2005 or something like that. So a few years after this man died, there was a 14-year-old girl who got bitten by a bat in church, and it just kind of fell down on her and bit her. And she was sedated and cooled down. And during this sedation period, they gave her several types of medication with the aim to boost her immune system. And that succeeded, and she was cured. And the doctors were really happy and hopeful, because less of a problem with bats giving people rabies, but more of a problem. In some countries, you have a lot of street dogs with rabies, and that they tend to bite quite a lot of people who die from rabies. So the treatment that they did was deemed to be inexpensive and accessible, even for kind of like poorer countries. So they're really hopeful, but unfortunately, they haven't been able to mimic it again. They've tried this treatment on several other patients, and it has failed.
Did she definitely have rabies then?
Sorry?
You definitely get rabies, because you said you can't really definitely test for it.
Yeah, so they have. They've tested it with enough accuracy, so they got a test result, but sometimes you could get the test result and get a false negative, if that makes sense. But they got a positive, so they weren't just thinking she had rabies. They knew she had it.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
So anyway, the good news is that anyone who's ever been vaccinated or ever been given post-exposure treatment within a reasonable time, everyone has been all right. So it's not like it might work. It does work. So that's the good thing. So if you end up handling bats for work, obviously you should make sure that you're vaccinated. You have to be vaccinated first you have 3 injections, and then you have the first booster after a year, and after that you have boosters every 3 to 5 years. And if you've had quite a few, which I've had at the moment, over the years I've had quite many injections, you can do a titer test, and that titer then looks whether you have built up enough immunity, so you can then perhaps leave it a little bit longer in between the boosters. And the Health Protection Agency pays for, or used to pay for it. They do it for bat hospitals and they do it for bat volunteers at the moment. But if you work for an ecological consultancy, your employer should pay for it. So you should check that with your doctor or nurse, because they will keep records of what you've been given to make sure that they give you the right dosage. If you're like informing people, members of the public, you can't be bitten by a bat without noticing. And bats don't have like an aggressive kind of protective bite. Like if you imagine some animals might just kind of give you a nip, just give you a scare for you to stay away. Or if you imagine how poisonous snakes can kind of like prick you with their little teeth and inject you with a poison. Like bats don't do that. They don't have, that's not part of their behavioral, what do you say, the group of their behaviors that they might have. So generally what the bat will do, they're not very scared of you. So they kind of generally just sit there. If, say, for example, a builder is working next to a bat in a roof area and he starts exposing the roof area, he's not going to get bitten without noticing the bat. He's not just like going to scrape him with his teeth or something like that. The only reason why a bat would bite you is if you grab it and hold it in your hand and restrict it. In that situation, it will bite you to kind of, for you to let go. But sometimes, we have situations where you have a child that may or may not have been bitten. You don't quite know. And sometimes when you get really stressed out, like one of my friends, he was handling a bat for bat care, just transporting it for like as an ambulance driver. And he just got in a situation where he couldn't remember. He's like, did I get bitten? I don't know. I was like really stressed out. My adrenaline was pumping. I was handling this bat. Was I wearing gloves? What did I do? Did I drop it? Did I grab it? He just cannot remember. So he just went and had post-exposure treatment anyway, because these things do happen. People get really stressed out and shocked, and they can't remember all the details. And I used to, when I worked at Bat Conservation Trust, I used to deal with 80 people a year that had been members of the public that had been bitten by bats. So that was part of my job role there. And what we would do there is we would contact the doctor on duty and the vet of duty and report it. And we couldn't give medical advice because Bat Conservation Trust isn't, qualified. We're not educated as doctors, but we could advise the doctors on the matter and tell them where to look things up. So there's like a little green book for doctors where they look up the information about rabies, in case maybe they don't have the latest up-to-date information. And we would certainly try to encourage people to get post-exposure treatment if there was any deemed risk.
Have you ever been bitten?
Hundreds of times.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because
I presume you haven't had after you've had the vaccine, do you not need the post-exposure treatment then?
This is a good question. The recommendation is that every time you get bitten, you should have post-exposure treatment. Now, if you handle a lot of bats, then when I say hundreds of times, some of those times were before we knew about this. So I've been handling bats since year 2000. And kind of the first years I handled bats, obviously we didn't know about rabies. So I was like volunteering at the bat hospital then, and we had children volunteers. They used to help out and handle the bats. And obviously they would get bitten occasionally. So the recommendation is that every time you handle a bat, you should wear gloves. Then it's up to you as a bat carer or handler whether you want to do that every time. But then if you get bitten, the recommendation is that every time you get bitten, even if you're vaccinated, you should then have post-exposure treatment. Now, if you handle bats a lot and get bitten a lot, should you have an injection every week? It's quite good for your health. So yeah, I can't really answer that question. That is up to you to make your own risk assessment. But the recommendations are clear: wear gloves, don't get bitten, have post-exposure treatment if you do get bitten. But obviously you have to have a little bit of common sense as well.
You asked me how many bats in the UK have rabies.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's go through that. That's a very, very important point. So there's only one species that have had active rabies. So active is when the bat you definitely got ill. So what can happen, because I just told you that rabies is fatal, you always die. But in bats, we found that sometimes they have been found to have antibodies against rabies. And we don't know why that is. That could indicate that someone had rabies, got well again, and then because they've developed antibodies. Another explanation could be that they've got the antibodies through the placenta from the mother, or through breastfeeding the mother. So that could be an explanation why they have antibodies but are not dead. And we don't really know that, but we do know that some bats have antibodies against rabies and some have active rabies. So anyway, the only species in the UK that's had active rabies is the Benton's bat. Now, in other countries, they have found that serotine bats have had rabies. So they are considered as a second risk species, especially because we know that they not only did they have rabies, but they had then bitten people who died afterwards. So, and as far as we know, they don't have rabies in the UK, but they might be more prone to it than other species. We don't really know. So when we have species that are what we kind of consider as high risk species, what we tend to do is we send out a bat carrier to identify the species. And if we are aware that it's a Doventans bat or a steratine bat, you are given an extra injection locally. So you're given something called immunoglobulins, which is an extra protection for the virus. And say, for example, you've been bitten in the finger, you'd be given that injection close to where the bite was. So that's an extra risk assessment that you make when a member of the public has been bitten, whether you can or should give those extra injections. Another species in the UK that's had antibodies but not been found to be ill is Natterer's bats, and we have no idea why that is. Just, you know, watch this space, try to read up about it. There's more to be found out about rabies in the UK or in the world. What we do believe is probably we've always had rabies in this country. They didn't come in with storms from France like we thought. It probably always been present in this country at a low level, and it probably doesn't transfer that easily. Like compared to a lot of other viruses, rabies is quite difficult to transfer. You don't have to get it even if you get bitten by an animal that has rabies. So it's not super easy to transfer, and that therefore it's probably always going to stay at low levels. It's not going to spread massively. So we're not like overly concerned about it. What we are concerned about is that because we have an increase in interest in bats in the UK, we have more bat hospitals, we got more members of the public being concerned about the bats, and more people handling them during research and professional surveys. There's much bigger risk that people will actually get bitten compared to 30 years ago, where very few people would handle bats.